Good afternoon, everybody, and happy Black History Month. My name is Michelle Nicole Johnson of Ujima Genealogy of Coastal Georgia, and welcome to today's presentation, a case study of the DNA of one of Coastal Georgia's most treasured Gullah-Geechee elders and matriarchs, Mrs. Mary Dawley Moran. Our two presenters today are both founding members of Ujima Genealogy, Terri Ward, also known as the Front Porch Genealogist, and Adolphus Armstrong, our resident DNA guru, are cousins with deep roots in Coastal Georgia's Gullah-Geechee families. They will be sharing their extensive research with us today as they explore how Mrs. Mary Moran, who is 100 years old, is connected to many Coastal Georgia families, both of African and European descent. For those of you with an ancestral connection to this area, as you learn about Mrs. Moran's heritage, you'll also be learning about your own. And that is the power of DNA. It expands our family history within a broad context, but it also brings it home with intimacy and specificity in a very intimate way. So our presenters will be sharing information also about an exciting new initiative that Ujima has involving DNA research. Today's presentation is co-sponsored by Ujima and the Coastal Georgia Genealogical Society. This is not our first time collaborating, and I hope it won't be our last. Please visit our website at ujimagen.org. That's UJIMAGEN.org to watch our past programs and follow us on Facebook to learn about our future projects. This program is being recorded, so if you have a problem with that, you might want to jump off now. If you have questions during our presentation, please put them in the chat. Some questions will be answered as our presentation is ongoing. Others will be answered at the end when our speakers will join us live. So let's begin. Sit back and take good notes. I'm going to turn the program over to Terri Ward and Adolphus Armstrong and our exploration of the DNA of Mrs. Mary Dawley.
Ujima Genealogy of Coastal Georgia and the Coastal Georgia Genealogical Society presents the Low Country Georgia DNA Project. And today, we will be celebrating Black History Month by focusing our attention on the family history and DNA results of Low Country Georgia centenarian and Gullah-Geechee cultural icon, Mary Dawley Moran. Mary's remarkable journey through life reminds us of the brilliant history and the legacy of our revered ancestors who endured the most soul-crushing, identity-swiping conditions and hardships, only to triumphantly reinvent themselves and emerge whole as African Americans. We are an American story, and it's reflected in our DNA. We're going to begin by sharing a little something about Mary, to give you some background about her family and her wondrous accomplishments and contributions to our shared culture. At times, it will be a bit technical for non-researchers who are just interested in our shared history, and for the hardcore serious researchers, there will be areas that have been tweaked, so as not to lose anyone along the way as we share Mary's interesting story. But I hope I carry each of you to the end of the presentation, and I promise there's a little something to enhance your knowledge of Low Country Georgia history, DNA testing, and genetic genealogy. There's something here for everybody. DNA testing is revealing answers to the mysteries and helping us to find our folks in ways we never envisioned. We'll be reviewing the ancestry of Mary's enslaved and European lines to identify genetic clusters and networks, and we'll use this info to demonstrate how one can potentially scale our brick wall issues and unlock the mysteries held within our DNA. We'll wrap up by devising a working hypothesis based upon these observations to further extend and genetically confirm our family lines. We bring passion, our knowledge, determination, and skills to this special type of research to support the initiatives of the Low Country Georgia DNA Project. And in case you haven't heard, the Low Country Georgia DNA Project is a close collaboration of researchers who are actively using DNA testing strategically to resolve our genealogical problems and challenges. We are a subgroup of Ujima Genealogy of Coastal Georgia, which is found on Facebook and at our website at www.ujimagen.org. It is our goal and mission to support family historians and genealogists with ties to Coastal Georgia who are making efforts to document their family lines by using DNA testing. Adolphus Armstrong, has been leading the effort to test our seniors and keep our connections to our Gullah-Geechee roots. We hope to elevate the level of research and documentation of Low Country Georgia family histories by creating genetically correct trees supported by concrete evidence only found within our DNA. In doing so, we see the potential to map out and recover our oldest family lines and find ancestors and kin whose ties were either lost, have fallen from current memory, or have been severed by the conditions set forth by the institution of slavery and the African slave trade. So, with that said, here's a little something about Mary Dawley Moran and her stellar family legacy. First and foremost, Mary Dawley Moran is the mother of 13 remarkable children and several grand and great-grandchildren. She is the wife and widow of the late Roosevelt Moran, who at one time served as one of the county's few African-American sheriffs at the height of the civil rights movement. She married and chose to rear her young family at Harris Neck, where she was raised, and generations of her family had toiled on the large plantations of that particular area. At 21 years of age and pregnant, Mary experienced one of the greatest upheavals that would forever color and change her family's fortune and destiny. They were forced out of the only homes they knew, and their community was razed to the ground by fire to make way for an airstrip at the start of World War II. This military installation failed to yield the results expected and was therefore promptly abandoned, leaving it in the hands of a number of county officials and businessmen who used the property for many questionable enterprises before it was finally converted into the wildlife refuge that we all know as Harris Neck Wildlife Reserve. Mary worked tirelessly to petition and protest the removal from her home, and she became a voice for the displaced community. She has spent years advocating for the right to return to her ancestral lands or to properly compensate those who were gravely impacted. She still represents and remains a symbol of the many voices raised in dissent and the people who were forcibly removed from their property, robbed of the opportunity to return and rebuild their once thriving community. She is the spirit and soul of Harris Neck, and she continues to embody the best of the Gullah-Geechee culture by sharing traditions, her background, and most importantly, a song that takes each of us with her to Africa across the seas, where it was sung by a young Mende girl who had learned the ancient melody from her mother as it had been passed down mother to daughter through the ages to pay tribute to those who were making the transition in spirit to their just reward. Mary is a natural storyteller, reminiscent of the venerated African griot, tending the roots of the family and tribe by sharing his vibrant history and weaving the details into wondrous tales of struggle, strife, perseverance, success, and ultimately triumph. She remembered the ancestors for each of us so that we would know them and continue to respect their journey and revere them. And as unique and interesting as Mary is, we found in her and others of her generation a wonderful opportunity to collaborate and recover our shared roots and ancestry. By testing our senior family members, we are able to definitively confirm our work in our genealogical pedigrees. Their results validate one's research, proving and disproving distant relationships that may be undocumented or nebulous memories for most of us. They extend family lines by helping us to discover new relationships among our shared matches. They help us to address brick walls and resolve challenges when it seems we've exhausted every effort. And just as importantly, they help us to build stronger family bonds as we strengthen relationships and our rapport with those who have consented to testing for us. It should go without saying, but testing our seniors helps to preserve our genetic and cultural heritage, especially those that may be tied to our magnificent Gullah-Geechee roots, leaving us better prepared to nurture and maintain our shared legacy and pass it to future generations. And with this rare and incredible picture, one easily sees why we would like to test our senior family members. We generally receive a set of 23 chromosomes of DNA inherited from each of our parents. One set comes from your mom and the other from your dad, so you'll obtain half your DNA from each parent. Each of us receives approximately 6,800 centimorgans of DNA, which represents the 3,400 centimorgans that are inherited from each parent and their ancestors, only to disperse it and spread it randomly among our offspring. The term centimorgan is the metric used to measure the amount of DNA shared or received. And due to some of the wonderful work done in the field by professional genealogists, we have an idea of how much DNA one generally receives based upon our relationships to one another. And from this work, we can project that the matrix daughter receives approximately half of her mother's DNA, or approximately 3,400 centimorgans. Her granddaughter receives 25%, and it divides in half with each successive generation until it washes out or expresses itself as a small random segment of genetic material. Now, these next images show how these relationships are interpreted, and we'll look in a chromosome browser. And for the new researchers, a chromosome browser is only the very best friend and tool any researcher can have at their disposal if they're seriously trying to figure out their genetic family histories. If you're content with just knowing we're cousins, then you're good, and you can remain on a competing testing platform and wait until someone posts how you may be related and hope they have posted the relationship correctly. But I'm finding, or it's been my expertise or experience, that most of us really don't know much more than the other about our most distant connections, as our family histories were terribly impacted by the enslavement of different branches, and we must rely upon family lore and fading memories. But if you really want to definitively know, view, and prove the connection to a specific ancestor, or discover new ones, you should seek access to a chromosome browser, because the DNA won't lie or steer you wrong. Your research foundation to use genetic genealogy effectively is generally drawn from these areas, which I kind of play loose with formal definitions used by professionals just to simplify these categories, which in some cases may overlap. One, there's oral history, which is comprised of personal interviews and interactions with what genealogists call as subjects fans. Fans are an acronym for the friends, associates, and neighbors one may choose to interview or research to better understand and document the ancestor one is actually seeking. Primary documents are the documents and data collected or recorded firsthand as our subject generates them. These are eyewitness accounts, such as those created at the time of the event, such as census records, birth, marriage, and death records, military records. It also includes diaries, letters, or any document created on the spot. Now, secondary sources and documents are generally interpretations or analysis of original documents. These include abstracts, transcriptions, databases, history books, and encyclopedias compiled after the original reporting or documentation of the event. And many of us have taken these steps and exhausted every resource and avenue available to us, and we invariably run into the horrible brick wall. If you've been researching long enough, there's a brick wall with your name on it, or I should say your ancestor's name on it. We just simply seem to run out of viable sources, and our research hits a dead end. And for many researchers, they simply check out and call it a wrap. Some will resort to fishing, and although it's not a bad strategy, it's here where we start to see the issues that may lead to incorrect trees and long-term research problems. Fishing allows one to quickly erect a tree on a major website with the hopes that someone will discover, contact you, or simply post something new, pretty much anything that you don't have in your own tree. Now, most researchers take the bait, and they then add the info to their personal trees without really questioning the source or considering whether the trees are correct. Others then tend to co-sign the info and add it to their trees, where the error now becomes generally accepted and passed along again and again and again among the research community. We've all fallen or acquiesced at one time in our research journey because it is generally encouraged by the major websites and considered the quickest and an acceptable way to build a tree. So fishing keeps one in the game as we try to get around the challenges of documenting our families and building our trees. But it may also sidetrack many who are accepting these errors and passing them along, and then seeing as they test, things are not aligning and matching up as they should, thus creating additional brick walls for oneself and our whole community of researchers. And if you don't mind waiting for that next post, that's okay. But I'm not always very patient when it comes to researching, and I'm not getting any younger. and I'm determined to take my research to new heights with the solid data and connections one can only secure through DNA testing. And that's how our community can address the scarcity of records, by testing our folks, especially the seniors. Now, Mary's matches should go back to these documented core lines. They have tentacles in other neighboring counties, and we found lines have migrated to other states and even abroad. The first two pieces of the genetic puzzle in family history represent her paternal side connections, and the next two pieces, 3 and 4, are her maternal side, with the fifth piece serving as an extension of that maternal line, which is well known and a documented tie to relatives of the plantar class. We are using these pieces of the genetic puzzle to build the missing pieces of her family lines and those of many others who may not have known or understood their own personal connection as well. So let's take a closer look at how these 5 branches have been formally documented and play out before we hit what seems to be that impenetrable brick wall. We see Mary with her parents, Robert and Rachel Amelia Shah, her 4 grandparents, Moses Dawley, Mary Delegate, Mustafa Shah, and Octavia Genlet, who's also known as Tauber. Her 4th generation gets a bit sketchier, as these ancestors have emerged from behind the veil erected by enslavement, and they don't regularly appear by name in formal records. They are generally recorded as tick marks on U.S. Census slave schedules and as property or assets under the names of their former owners, or mentioned in slave ads if they're ever referenced at all. We found Mary's ancestors named in Civil War records, estate records, the documents of their children, and they survive in the stories and the songs shared by Mary Moran with her extended line of kin. The shared ties to Catherine, a descendant of the Mende tribe of Africa, has taken one line back to their shared roots in Sierra Leone. Her European line of Delegate kin has always been acknowledged and well known by her descendants, and her son Wilson even maintained a respectful and nice relationship with a Delegate descendant who embraced their shared connections. The line is a long and old line that is well documented, and it actually extends well past the ancestors that I've chosen to display here. I did find conflicting information regarding some of the top-tier ancestors, so for now, I've chosen to avoid sharing anything more that may potentially prove incorrect or misdirect your research. So now we are armed, prepared to dig into her results that are posted on MyHeritage.com. We will first aim to prove and support her pedigree by using these 4 tools: the MyHeritage Ethnicity Report, the MyHeritage Auto Cluster Report, the MyHeritage Chromosome Browser for segment comparisons and analysis, as well as the Triangulation tool to really dig deep and affirm specific shared match ties to potentially discover new ancestors. Ultimately, we want to shatter these brick walls that keep us stuck. The MyHeritage Ethnicity Report is the first report that most researchers are naturally drawn to because it shares where one's people actually come from, and it may offer a few surprises by revealing ethnicities one had no idea existed for them. The MyHeritage Ethnicity Report is pretty comprehensive and provides information that truly can be used to break down one's genetic history. However, I do caution any researchers using ethnicity metrics of any kind to not get too entrenched or tied to what they're seeing. Ethnicity descriptions may be very layered and complex and may change as sampling from different world regions becomes wider and the data is more refined. Remember, race and ethnicity are social constructs that may vary from country to country or culture to culture. And we are aware that the designation of white or Black in a Hispanic country may differ from our definition here in the United States, which is still sometimes somewhat tied to the archaic one-drop rule. We also cite that different African tribes and ethnic groups, due to conquests and migrations, are no longer the specific ethnic groups of ancient times. So again, consider this report a good clue to help you align, filter, and narrow down potential matches. But although that label may change, not the actual shared DNA. And European lineage is generally a given and not a surprise within African American family lines. Although it is currently the elephant in the room when talking about African American genealogy and Black history, we must address the institution of slavery and how it essentially built a nation within a nation, as well as a nation of hybrids, people of African descent, but no longer Africans, and mixed with multiple ethnicities reflecting the captives and the migrants who comprised our country and home. African Americans reflect the true American story in our nation's history, with 25% of African American DNA being tied or rooted in European ancestry. Our genetic legacy tells the story without even saying a word. And approximately 30% of all African American men will trace back to a European haplogroup, meaning their Y DNA, which is passed from father to son in an unbroken chain, ends or actually begins at the top with a European male ancestor. Now, Mary Dawley Moran grew up aware of her European ancestry. Among the European Delegate line, Edward Wentworth Delegate is purported to be the father of Mary's grandfather, Mustafa Shah. Upon viewing the earliest Delegate lines of European descent in Georgia, the line takes us back to Thomas Philip Delegate, who is generally referenced simply as Philip Delegate in most surviving records. Now, Philip Delegate was among the numerous Huguenots who fled religious persecution in Europe to settle in South Carolina before migrating to Georgia around 1733. Huguenots were generally French Protestants who broke with the Catholic Church and were consequently driven out of parts of Europe that would not tolerate dissension. It is documented that Philip Delegate Sr. and Jr. would end up in St. Simon's in service to General James Oglethorpe, the founder of the Georgia colony. The colony was established to protect the vulnerable border of South Carolina from Spanish insurgents and Native American tribes who were hostile to British settlements. Now, Philip was noted to be among those who fought in the Battle of Bloody Marsh, fighting side by side with the Highlanders from the McIntosh clan. So you see very clearly on that these old planter families that would come to own some of our enslaved family lines are crossing paths with each other and engaging. So now, Bloody Marsh was a critical battle in Georgia history because it effectively defeated and drove the Spanish out of the area and established a border between what would become the states of Georgia and Florida. And here we are viewing a more detailed pedigree chart exclusively outlining Mary's mixed Delegate Shaw line. It is a work in progress, but to date, a lot of time and focus went into producing it, and there are still details that I will continue to work on. For now, it serves as a blueprint to work with Mary's European matches. The pedigree presented starts with the union of Thomas Philip Delegate and Eleanor Clement, and ends with Mustafa Shah, the child of Edward Wentworth Delegate, and his enslaved concubine, Catherine. Philip Jr. married Jane Dawley, or Dawley, whose surname may have been the source of the corrupted name of Dawley that we see among Mary's African ancestors. His siblings are associated with the DeVoe, another prominent colonial family, the Rand, Campbell, Simpson, and Tobias families. Philip and Jane had at least 8 children, with 2 of his daughters marrying into the illustrious families of Liechtenstein, which is anglicized as Liechtenstein, and that of William Penn, the founder of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Upon Jane's death, he married a Margaret Curtis, a well-to-do heiress whose family owned properties on Wausau and Skidaway Islands. And this second branch of descendants coming through Margaret would introduce the Bacon line of Liberty County to the Delegates. Philip and his siblings' extended lines would end up on the wrong side of history, and they became Tories, those who remained loyal to the crown and backed the British side during the Revolutionary War. Consequently, this choice would ding the impeccable reputation of the Delegate family, and many were forced to flee to Canada, Florida, and the Bahamas at this time in our nation's history. Philip's son David with father Edward Delegate, who would in turn marry his first cousin, often referenced as Blind Jane, and she was the daughter of David's brother. Their son, Edward Wentworth Delegate, would settle in McIntosh County, where he kept in bondage Catherine, the mulatto daughter of the enslaved Mende girl, who passed along the song and traditions of her home in Sierra Leone. Now, according to chroniclers, the Delegates are a large and ancient family line which claims descent from Norwegian kings who invaded the north of France. They then trace back to a knight from Normandy who served and accompanied William the Conqueror during the Norman invasion of England during the pivotal year of 1066, which forever changed British history and the monarchy by installing a French king. As we are viewing Mary's ethnicity report, it clearly shows evidence of Scandinavian, which can be interpreted as the Norse or Viking markers that are alluded to in this instance. Her Iberian genetic markers are located and found near the ancestral home of the Delegates in northern France. When one pulls up her match list, we can easily confirm and establish kinship to the line of European Delegates by her matches. Among Mary's matches, we are finding the Delegate markers in French Canadians, numerous Floridians, Bahamians, Scandinavians, and of course, fellow Georgians. Many no longer carry the Delegate surname, as it seems male heirs have died out and females are carrying the line forward and losing their maiden names, but their genetic imprint is definitely there. And in this case, the reports show Mary is matching with at least 33 genetic cousins who appear to share segments of DNA shared among descendants of European stock, which can be traced back to Delegate lines. So let's look more at her match list further to begin searching for the distinct African-centric lines as well, because here lies a significant part of her ancestry, and we can potentially unlock clues to help us identify the most elusive recent common ancestors shared among her matches. As we proceed with the research, I tend to encourage everyone using genetic genealogy to download their match lists. Your research and work are only as good as the data that you're working with. And it is easier to work with large amounts of data at a glance when you can view it all at once in a spreadsheet. And MyHeritage provides you full access to your data, to your DNA data, which distinguishes a platform from its closest competitor that does not grant this ability. This is an invaluable feature and tool, and I can't say enough about how it will enhance and support your research. Once downloaded as a CVS file, you will then convert it by saving it as an Excel file, which enables you to customize the spreadsheet to suit your needs and interests. In mine, you can see I've added columns with conditional formatting to record the side that match is coming in on and to record my notes in the most recent common ancestors for each match as I discover them. It allows me to sort on specific columns and to cluster the data as I see fit. Organizing and clustering your matches is the first step to take when attempting to find your common ancestors with your matches. And you can filter your matches by ethnicity, location, or DNA shared, or surnames to organize your clusters on your spreadsheet. Now, armed with our downloaded match and segment list, we're now prepared to do some chromosome and segment analysis to find Mary's African-centric lines of Shah, Delegate, and Dawley matches. We'll be viewing her as well as the Genlet, and we'll be viewing her match list and considering shared centimorgans through a chromosome browser, clustering the DNA, analyzing the segments, and comparing matches to hopefully find those elusive ancestors. Here you'll see the terms to make note of: shared centimorgans, the unit of measure we already discussed, chromosome browser, which you'll see in action, DNA clustering, match, and segment analysis, which again we'll be using in the next few slides. And if they're new to you, just drop a note in the chat with your questions, and either Adolphus or I, or even the community, will answer. We're all family and fellow researchers here, and we'll build our lines together. Now, in regard to segments, I always explain that they represent chunks or little pieces of baggage that your ancestors left behind and passed on to you and all of your relatives. And segment and cluster analysis further confirms the pedigree and lets us see where one's DNA meets on each chromosome. And before we proceed with those details, I'm going to introduce you to Mary's other lines of kinship. Like this mulatto soldier, Mary Dawley Moran's grandfather, Mustafa Shah, was counted among the numerous brave men who fled their owners to serve in the United States Colored Infantry during the Civil War. You see the young man that I've selected here bears a similar description that is seen on the pension record immediately behind him. And I learned much about his life in this period from his pension record, and due to my attending the Ossabaw Island Symposium of 2008 featuring the Atlantic world. His riveting story, The Legend of Mustafa Shah, has been captured and told by the trailblazing work and research conducted by Dr. Allison Dorsey of Swarthmore College. And boy, does she weave and document a story for you. You'll see in the corner, there's a QR code. You can use this with your phone to go directly to that website after viewing this presentation or when it's posted, or you can bookmark it now. As the son of his former owner, Dorsey describes the young Mustafa's service in the 33rd USCT, explaining how he fled to South Carolina to serve in one of the first regiments raised for African-American soldiers in the Civil War. This is the same squadron in which the first African-American Army nurse, Susie Taylor King, served and wrote about in her remarkable book, Reminiscence of My Life in Camp with the 33rd United States Colored Troops. And I'm going to shout out to Hermina Glass Hill. She's one of the foremost authorities on Susie King, and she's in attendance today. We thank her for her dedication and passion to doing this type of work. Now, Dr. Dorsey's presentation provides insight into Mustafa's journey to acquire property and to forge a new destiny as a free man. She recounts a story of a bold, daring, courageous, rebellious former soldier who refused to acquiesce to the powers who sought to execute the warrants to remove former bondsmen from the property they earned on behalf of their military service and were entitled to under Sherman's Field Order 15. His descendants would inherit this dynamic spirit, and we see it in Mary, in her children, and her cousins as they've been leaders at the forefront of the Harris Neck Reserve controversy and the fight for reparations. Now, as we begin to identify and cluster our family lines, many coastal Georgians will encounter some endogamy. It's a fancy word to generally reflect the tradition of cousins marrying cousins over successive generations. It generally occurs in isolated or socially closed communities. And when it happens once, you experience what we call pedigree collapse. If this practice happens often enough, within a few generations, your line develops full-on endogamy. The enslaved had no choice nor agency in choosing a spouse, and the institution of slavery fostered these types of unions by keeping the enslaved tied to the plantations. After emancipation, it was simply easier to remain and choose a spouse among your shared social network. I attended a seminar provided by the historian Cornelia Bailey, in which she shared the mores and traditions of her beloved Sapelo Island and the saltwater Geechee culture. And she spoke about cousin marriages, essentially kin marrying kin, noting that the enslaved weren't getting off the island anytime soon. Only a few boat hands were privy to rowing to the other side where the freshwater Geechees resided, so one was prone to marry a relative. Their lines intermarried, and it was generally accepted and sanctioned as long as the union was 3 generations out and the old folks approved. So if your ancient roots are tied to this area and your family has remained in the area for 3 or 4 generations, you're going to find endogamy in your tree. So as my cousin June would say, they didn't take the buggy to the next town. They went fishing for a spouse in the family gene pool. Endogamy is a reality within our genetic family lines, and it is very challenging, but possible to navigate and wade through with the proper tools of segment analysis and clustering. And speaking of endogamous lines, the Delegates of African descent, this line was at one time one of the most challenging family lines of research because there are tons of them in the county, yet there has been very little formal documentation, despite the fact that some of the family lines have been at the center of some of the county's most pivotal historical moments, such as the Darien Insurrection of 1899. African-American families who choose to carry the surname Delegate are found among the plantations owned by the planter families of Harris, King, Thompson, and ironically, rarely among the bondsmen owned by the Delegate family of European descent. And to learn more about naming constructions and choices of the former enslaved, you should visit our very own Stacy Cole's website, www.theyhadnames.net. A lot of great information is there. Mary's paternal grandmother was a Delegate of African descent. Her father, Robert, was Mary's great-grandfather and was once owned by Margaret Harris. Margaret descended from the Baker family, who were some of the early settlers and planters of Liberty County. She married into the Harris family, whose surname reflects the naming of the community of Harris Neck. Robert's ownership is a fact that is formally documented in Margaret's very unique will, which is signed by none other than the illustrious Tunis Gullet Campbell, the first Black community organizer, as well as two other African American men, Hamilton Delegate and Samuel Johnson. And much to the dismay and disapproval of the white community, Margaret would will all of her land, which consisted of 4 plantations, to her former slave, Robert Delegate. The existence of this will, although it was challenged in court, is evidence of the power wielded by Black politicians and community leaders during Reconstruction, who were initially able to enforce its execution. Robert Delegate was not only identified as a loyal, resourceful former slave, he proved to be quite the businessman and visionary by choosing to sell parcels to other freedmen from the area. He is the same Robert Delegate who supported and accompanied Mustafa Shah when the state and federal government sought to rescind Sherman's Field Order 15, which granted 40 acres and a mule to former veterans along the coast. The Genlet line is one of the most obscure African-American family lines found among Mary's line of kin. We find the surname mentioned at the top of many family lines as distant ancestors. I say obscured because few descendants of African ancestry that choose to carry the name have remained in the county, and they are difficult to find. Now, among the slaves, there was an unspoken hierarchy, and they took pride in being owned by the most respected planters and the largest slave-owning families of the planter class. In the slave narratives recorded by the WPA or in accounts written after the Civil War, you'll find former bondsmen boasting that they were owned by the best blood in the country and not formally owned by 4 white families. In this case, the Genlet planters of European descent fit that bill as the wealthy plantation elite. The Genlets of European descent were an old and prosperous Huguenot family line who migrated from Europe and settled in the Carolinas before residing in Georgia, specifically McIntosh County, and building some of the most prosperous plantations along the Georgia coast. The earliest migrant, Jean-Francois de Geneliat, and his family migrated from Switzerland to France before landing in South Carolina, and he is noted to be the first of his nation in the state. Huguenots were French Protestants who fled their homes in search of religious freedom like the Delegates, avoiding persecution and potential death by the hands of Catholic-dominated Europe. The Genlets were not only successful planters, but they count among them some of the state's most prominent and successful lawyers and military leaders among their clan. Genlet slaves took pride in the association and were once as elevated and revered within the enslaved community as those slaves owned by Pierce Meese Butler on Butler Island and those of Thomas Spalding on Sapelo. A handful of former slaves took the Genlet name as their own, but it appears by the turn of the century, these family lines began to die out, migrate, and in some cases appeared to choose another surname. I tend to believe it's because it was too difficult to spell. But the Genlets held slaves in bondage on their numerous plantations, notably Arctic, Windy Hill, and Ceylon. And I share these locations so that researchers will be able to consider whose ancestors among one's matches may have had access or resided in close proximity to an enslaved ancestor. Although we have not yet detected the genetic imprint of the European Genlets of the planter class in Mary's African-centric family line, we have found markers and evidence of the European line among a few of her distant African-American cousins. And here's an interesting aside. Hollywood star Joanne Woodward, wife of Paul Newman, is a member of this illustrious clan of planters. Her great-grandfather, John Farquhar Genealiat, was born in Darien, and she was raised in Thomasville or Marietta. It is an interesting association that demonstrates how closely we all may be connected and bonded. The Dawley line is another old family line associated with the Harris Neck community. They descend from the old McIntosh County patriarch, Quamino Dawley, who is purported to be related to the Quamino of Chatham County. Quamino of Chatham was sometimes called Qua or Quash, and he earned fame and his freedom for his role in the Revolutionary War. Qua Dawley was a river pilot who aided the British in sacking of Savannah. He bartered his skills and provided the Brits intel and guidance in using the numerous waterways and tributaries which led into the city in exchange for his freedom and that of his immediate family. So coincidentally or not, he seems to be aligned with the Tories, just as the older European Dawley lines. The British would promise Qua his freedom, which was granted, and a line of African-American Dawleys would emerge as free people of color and were counted on the pre-registers of Chatham County. There are surviving documents and accounts written about the Quamino of Revolutionary War fame. The exact details of this distant connection have fallen from family memory, but the potential to recover this tie exists. As I said, there are written records to explore, and of course, there's the potential to flesh this out further through genetic testing of Dawley descendants. And like their presumed ancestor, the Dawleys in McIntosh County took a commanding role in leading the African community at Harris Neck. We count among the line prominent civil servants who served as postmasters, a health official who managed a horrific smallpox epidemic at Harris Neck that mirrors some of the impact that we're experiencing right now as we're going through COVID. And some would fulfill a leadership role as clergymen in McIntosh and neighboring Chatham County. The surname has undergone some changes, with descendants identifying themselves as Dawley, spelled with an A-W, or Dawley spelled like doll, and in some cases, Daily, as in D-A-I-L-E-Y, again, giving credence to a potential tie to the maiden name of a Delegate matriarch of European descent. Segment research permits us to see the emergence of this family line in Mary's test results, and we can distinctly see a sharp and discernible separation of the delegates of African descent from those of European descent. So now we view the lines of Mary's grandparents. We can take a closer look at the genetic clusters among her matches. MyHeritage provides its users with a very unique tool, which eliminates weeks and even months of tedious work with just a click of the button. This tool will consolidate and organize key matches into genetic clusters for you, eliminating the need to incessantly click through one's list again and again to discern how you match. So the auto cluster report allows one to proceed to flush out these new clusters of genetic kin, delineate and organize these clusters to help discern how Mary's related to her matches and where the genetic type potentially originated, based upon whom she shares the cluster, and to determine a most recent common ancestor or shared ancestral couple. And here's how it's generated. The feature alone is reason to test and to upload your test results on the MyHeritage platform. The auto cluster report is based on one's DNA results only. It's not based upon trees generated, nor subject to human error. It's all science and not conjecture. So here's how to read what you're looking at. As we review Mary's auto cluster report, we see 21 clusters here, and I focused only upon 3 because I immediately recognized surnames among these clusters of matches. And those are the ones of European ancestry, Delegate or Moran kinship groups that are African American, and of course, the African Mende line of kinship from Sierra Leone. The colored squares represent where matches intersect and potentially show common ancestry. White squares show that these particular matches within the cluster do not match a specific person within the cluster, but they match the others, and they are still a part of the genetic cluster. It demonstrates that DNA is random and recombines in different ways for everyone, and even siblings don't get the same genetic pieces or spread. Now, a really, really interesting part of this tool and this graphic is the inclusion of the floating gray squares outside of each cluster. They seem pretty unassuming since they're not boldly colored, but their presence on the chart in near specific clusters signal that the match shares an additional cluster with the test taker. So when one views the intersecting gray cluster and follows it to the cluster in which they are represented as a colored square, you're looking at a double cousin who may be signaling the second set of ancestors or a single ancestral couple, a single ancestor that represents a half relationship. So this is a very powerful and useful discovery. So the auto cluster report is a dynamic tool which does the heavy lifting of identifying the best matches to discern your common ancestry and displays your most prominent clusters for you. It may potentially change as more people test and clusters grow larger, smaller, or more defined, and updates give you more data to work with. This is especially important with African American research, as so much remains undocumented and we have no concrete evidence or a paper trail to signal where the DNA is leading. The report is unique to each tester, as one can see how my auto cluster compares with Mary's. I have significantly fewer, probably because my maternal line is not as well represented on this platform where I can see them. But I must add, I have made some of the biggest discoveries here, despite the lighter representation of that side of my family. Mine only has 7 clusters, and that big red square represents my McIntosh County ties and kin. So that's where I'm finding all of you all. Again, the report changes as new testers come in, and we see here that Mary's report acquired 2 more clusters within a year. MyHeritage is the only testing platform to provide this tool, and I say testing platform. You can find one on GEDmatch, which is not a testing platform, but you will not find this tool on other competing testing sites. And so this is a big win for all of the MyHeritage subscribers or users. While we may share some matches, it is showing that we may match with them in different ways. Now, this image is a numerical data-driven representation of the colorful graphic of the auto cluster report that I just showed you. And now we're ready to put this tool in practice. You're looking at the downloaded data used to generate that draft chart. And as always, I've customized it and added color and lines to define the boundaries of each cluster so that I may easily see them at a glance. Those notable gray squares that I mentioned are now floating on this sheet as isolated numbers outside the numerical clusters that we're viewing. And as I continue to customize my sheet and view the data, a few of those gray squares represented by number really jump out and catch attention. I'm surprised to see one in particular from cluster 15. There you go. And it's also pointing to a relationship with those in cluster 5 and vice versa. So of course I'm having a minute because I've done genealogies for both test takers. They are my cousins, and I thought I knew pretty much everything about their lines. And here we go. I got this surprise moment. I know this match is actually Winston. Winston on cluster number 15 of Mary's auto cluster report is matching cousin Johnny in cluster 5. And cluster 5 is comprised of a number of Delegate and Moran descendants. So this is really news. So I'm having a George Costanza moment, and all of you Seinfeld fans will understand that reference, but all of you others, these worlds in my book should not collide. So the questions become, what lines do tester number 47 Johnny and tester number 5 Winston have in common, and how do they relate to Mary Dawley Moran? And secondly, how do these relationships tie into the other clusters of kin related to Mary Dawley Moran? And answering part of the question was now easy. It was said, and I quote, "The song was African, but we didn't know which language she was singing, and she did not know the meaning of the words." Mary's recollection of an old African song sung by her great-grandmother verifies and reconnects the family of her match on MyHeritage DNA within cluster number 15 on chromosome 20. These are DNA segments passed by Catherine and her Mende ancestors. Mary visited Africa to meet members of the tribe in which her grandmother Catherine was associated. A film was made documenting the reunion, and it was entitled The Language of Crying. Winston's family was also able to discern their connection to the tribe due to their connection with Mary, and they made the trek to their ancestral home as well. So we easily find the answer due to the exciting discovery that Mary had inadvertently been passing along a song, which would tie her back to Africa, transcending time and covering several generations. And the relationship is further confirmed by an estate record. We have here an estate record which further supports the connection between Mary and Winston. We discovered that Mustafa Shah was also called Stafford or Staff, and we find an announcement of his death in a newspaper around 1897. The estate record corresponds with this time frame and shows that a Charles Shah is applying for guardianship of his younger siblings. I have generated two quick and dirty trees to demonstrate a comparison between Mary and Winston's lines, and we can easily see that this Charles mentioned in the estate record is the Charles and Winston's tree. Winston is a cousin to Mary, as Charles, Winston's maternal side grandfather, and Mary's mother, Rachel, are half siblings. And now it's time to figure out why Johnny is found within the same clusters when this connection was never passed down. We're going to use the triangulation tool to dig a little deeper. When 3 or more of your matches are matching on the same chromosome and segment, they are said to be triangulating segments. And this is how that looks in theory. Triangulating segments help to identify which side the segment represents, because remember, one inherits the DNA on each chromosome from each parent, and the browser can only show where it's sitting, but not which parent the segment is coming from. So in this case, we know that this is Mary's maternal side because we've ascertained that Winston is on that side as well, and it's reflecting something passed from the Shah and African-American Genlet line that they share. And the nice thing is, MyHeritage helps us identify triangulated segments by posting this symbol to show this unique association. And again, this is a pretty deep information that's well below the surface, and you can't immediately see without some sort of tool. Note the 3 brackets to the right of the match, which in this case is Johnny. And here, MyHeritage is saving you time and work, automating this research with just a click and indicating that 3 cousins share triangulated segments. And here's a close-up view of that symbol, which is represented by 2 small bars, just outlined, within a bracket, showing that your 2 matches triangulate with you. And as the old folks had the saying, dance with the one that brung you, meaning to go with what you know. Given this fact and scenario, we're going to take it a step further and start with what we know. And this is how it looks on the platform. Mary matches Winston. Winston matches Johnny. And Johnny matches Mary. There's our triangular set. Now, Mary shares 4 DNA segments with Winston, who is also a descendant of the Mende slave, Catherine, and the planter Edward Delegate. She shares 3 DNA segments with Johnny, who I've documented as a cousin on her husband's side of the family, and he again unexpectedly shows up here. As we compare Mary to each of her cousins, we see and confirm that Mary shares the triangulated segment on chromosome 20 with Winston and with Johnny. And we also note that none of the matches from cluster 5 are here because they represent another ancestral tie, not this specific one. I also take note that the other 2 matches found, Harding and Nikki, who are also in that cluster of 15, They do not triangulate with Winston, Johnny, and Mary, so they're signaling another distinct connection with her, but it's not the same genetic piece representing the ancestors in common between Mary, Winston, and Johnny on her maternal side, yet they are a part of that maternal line. And since I now know how and where Mary and Winston match, I can now more minutely compare this match with Johnny, who is also showing up in cluster 15 with Winston. And I know that Johnny and Winston's tie with Mary in cluster 5 with the Dawley Moran cousins reflects another piece of the puzzle. And I can now see what's going on in there in the story these matching segments are trying to tell me or allude to. And I find this absolutely amazing. That's how precise this tool is. And it would be difficult to discern these small distinctions without viewing these connections through these tools. So we wrapped this piece up, or our case up, by noting the chromosome they share and start and end points for my notes for future references. And you see that there in that corner. And now I know that any new matches that fall in this area on the chromosome and triangulates with Mary, Winston, and Johnny are likely to descend from the same ancestor. And so to sum up and keep you all with me, we now know without question that Johnny shares a common ancestor with Mary's maternal side, which is new intel for us because he has a triangulated segment, confirming the 3 test takers descend from a common ancestral couple or a single person or source. That's a given, and that's a fact. Remember, we may each match in different ways, so every match on a segment will not necessarily triangulate, as we're seeing with Harding and Nikki, and therefore their segments may hold another key to one's genetic composition or DNA story. So I'm going back to the research and trees that I created years ago when I had no idea that a connection existed to view the potential connections, hoping that this new info now helps. So you're viewing my quick and dirty trees for each match, Mary, Winston, and Johnny. We call these quick and dirty trees or spec or skeleton trees because they do not contain a lot of detail since they're just used for quick comparisons. There are no dates, no locations, just stripped down to the bare bones, and that's the term skeleton trees, and spec trees because the entries are speculative at this stage. And the question remains, where do these trees potentially overlap? I'm going to share my process of deductions as I eliminate the ancestors that are not good fits for the 3 of them. So I built these trees up another generation because I had done so in the past, and I thought I might be able to discern who the 3 cousins share in common better, especially since small amounts of centimorgans shared, they're basically small amounts shared among the 3, which then suggests it's a distant connection, not something really close. With European ancestry, I could potentially see a surname connection at this point, but because we're showing 5 generations for Johnny and 4 generations for Winston and 3 for Mary, because the enslavement of her 4th generation ancestors has been obscured due to the lack of records in surnames. So given that Mary's ancestors were enslaved and displaced surnames they adopted, there still isn't a clear-cut choice that I can immediately see within my spec trees. I have to follow the hints within the DNA. They say, change the way you look at things and the things you look at change, and this is definitely the case here. So with this in mind, I start my process of elimination. First and foremost, I eliminate Mary and Winston's paternal sides because we have confirmed their maternal side connections through Mustafa Shah. Now we can clearly see the Shah connection, which ultimately leads to the Delegates of European descent. I'm going to move those Morans next from Johnny's side because the Dawley Moran pieces appear to be clustered in 5 for now, and not here in cluster 15, which we're trying to break down. His line does have a prominent line of mulattoes fathered by another well-known planter, and neither planter's descendants seem to match each other, so I could confidently eliminate them. This leaves an unknown, unnamed male, but it's the women who tend to be to have been compromised, so we're going to remove him. And now looking closer, we see that Julia has no path forward for now. So I'm going to go ahead and remove her. So Johnny's line is now pretty clear. It's from basically his father's, the paternal side, on up to June and Catherine. Now, I'm also aware of the lines established by Winston's maternal side, and I remember Harding, who I've not been able to place yet. Now, Harding matches with them in this cluster and is pointing to these lines, but not through Catherine or Mustafa, where Winston, Mary, and Johnny triangulate on a single segment on chromosome 20, and he doesn't. So his match falls on a line opposite Mustafa's. And I'm now confident removing them. So the DNA is suggesting that the two Catherines remaining may be one and the same. Again, we know they all triangulate on one segment within Mary's maternal side cluster on chromosome 20, which can potentially be the Catherine listed here. This will serve as the basis for my working hypothesis. And this is not a solid conclusion yet, but a pretty good basis to form a hypothesis. We'll be able to firm it up once we have a larger cross-section of sampling or DNA on MyHeritage platform to continue to compare it with these tools. As it stands, this is huge because it unites a number of family lines in my database and effectively eliminates a major brick wall. So in conclusion, I'm looking at Johnny going up to a Catherine, I'm looking at Winston going up to a Catherine, and Mary going up to the Catherine. So it gives me a framework for progress on cluster number 15, and I can come up with my working hypothesis based upon the traditional primary and secondary documents uncovered, plus the results of my carefully selected DNA matches and documented skeleton trees. I can question as I move forward with my research, is Catherine the missing matriarch of several of our Harris-Neck family lines? And now I have this working hypothesis. And the key word here is hypothesis. This is not a definitive conclusion. And I would feel better about making a solid conclusion with a wider sampling of test takers that match and triangulate with Mary, Winston, and Johnny to fully embrace and confirm this conclusion. So although I can say based upon my research of other lines connected to these families, this hypothesis makes sense. And other extended family lines fall neatly in place in my database. So again, this is a hypothesis, and one should not post it in their trees until it can be definitively confirmed by additional testing and sampling. I'll be conducting that research exclusively on the MyHeritage platform, where the tools that I need are provided to properly do this type of work. Now, going back to the original auto cluster report, at least the data of it, my original impression was that cluster number 5 displayed Delegate and Moran descendants. I was leaning towards Delegates as a shared common ancestry because here's what we know. We already determined that Johnny and Winston share the maternal sideline within cluster 15 on chromosome 20, where we find Catherine. The matches of cluster 5 do not seem to share the markers we potentially determined to be Catherine's in cluster 15. Now, based upon the reports and data that I ran and viewed, Johnny's second connection with Mary should be on the opposite side where her African-American Delegate line comes into play. But these assumptions really don't explain for me why Alma, who like Johnny is a Moran descendant, is placed here. Now, the Morans are free people of color of mixed indigenous African and European lines. I had not encountered or heard of a Delegate association prior to my second great-grandfather William with this line before. So this is new intel for me and other researchers, as this association is not on any other tree out there. And believe me, I've checked. I've been looking for 30 years now. This fact makes this cluster even more nebulous and murky for me as a researcher, because I've been researching Morans, Delegates, and Dawleys for so many years, and I've not run into any crisscrossing lines at this level before. And the nagging question still remains, why are Alma and Johnny here in cluster 5 with Mary? Unfortunately, Time will not permit us to run through the steps I've taken to break down the other side of this puzzle and to offer a second working hypothesis. I am also aware that there are a number of descendants of these lines present today who would like to work through this puzzle with me. So since I've shared the intel and methodology, I'd like to challenge you all to use the tools here on MyHeritage that I demonstrated today to make your own assessments and discover why this cluster exists to build a working hypothesis that we can all embrace. Feel free to send me your assessment, being careful to show your work so we can see that you're not simply guessing at the connection. We can then follow up with another session to answer these questions and dig a little deeper into our associations to Mary Moran if enough people are interested and choose to participate. I'd love to see how you all would proceed with these tools to make your case. You can send your analysis and conclusion to the Front Porch Genealogist at gmail.com or to Adolphus Armstrong at aaarmstrong3649 at gmail.com should you wish to participate or receive alerts or additional information as we proceed and move forward with this research. In the interim, I'll also be focused upon building a genealogical case with concrete evidence, not conjecture as the sampling improves and grows. And to wrap things up and summarize, we've reviewed and used oral history and testimony. I've confirmed the pedigree. I've used supporting documents, marries in common with match lists for comparison and analysis, the auto cluster, triangulation, segment list data, ethnicity reports for analysis and proof to live up to my mantra to write the record as well as write the record. Now, have we figured out everything? Absolutely not. But Mary Moran's DNA results, MyHeritage DNA, and the tools exclusive to the platform have aided in revealing lost and undocumented connections in ways that other testing platforms can't. We've worked through a maze of relationships, just scratching the surface, and there's still much more to come. With your help, we'll continue to untangle the complicated network of kith and kin along the Georgia coast. Now, if you choose to go no further than the steps outlined and discussed today, you're still much further and deeper in your analysis of your family network than you would have been on a platform without these tools. Genealogy research is a marathon, not a sprint. Traditional research, ethnicity reports, genetic clustering, segment analysis are all helping us to win with MyHeritage DNA. And if you're going to run this race, you should choose a great course or track like MyHeritage DNA to do it so we can create better, more accurate genealogies. There are researchers who are content with aggregating records and just building out a huge tree, but as we can discern from Mary's DNA and history, each segment has a unique story to tell, especially about how it got there, and the ancestors are making their presence known to tell it. For me, it's far more rewarding to collect and share the priceless stories that we lose as each generation makes that spiritual trek and returns to their origins. There's room for all of us in this space, but one of the ways in which the Low Country Georgia DNA Project seeks to differentiate themselves and carry forth not just our genetic heritage, but our cultural legacy and history as well. If you are like-minded, we hope you'll stand by us, dig in with us, and support the mission by helping us to carve out a home where all researchers interested in Georgia genealogy reside. We can win this race together, recover our family lines and histories by establishing a research hub on MyHeritage with and using MyHeritage DNA. We hope you'll join us on the platform with MyHeritage DNA, the company that cares about your community, your Low Country Georgia roots and heritage. You can find out more information, upload your results regardless of the website that you have used to take your actual DNA test at www.myheritage.com. And at this moment, I'd like to thank you all for your time, participation, and attention. And we hope to see you, talk to you soon as we continue to dig into our Low Country Georgia DNA and roots. And again, thanks Mary Moran for her contributions and her family for making all of this possible.
Thank you. So now we're at our question and answer segment of our program. And before we jump into that, I want to thank Stacy Cole, who is with both Ujima and Coastal Georgia Genealogical Society. She's behind the scenes helping to run this ship, and we appreciate her for all her hard work and dedication. So, Adolphus, I'm going to turn it over to you. I know you've been monitoring the questions, and I hope that you'll have some answers for some of our guests today. Take it away.
Excuse me. Thank you, Michelle. The beautiful thing is people in the chat have been so forthcoming. A lot of the questions that arose in the chat, people in the group have actually answered in a large extent. So just in case if you have not been in the chat, or if you've been joining us from the telephone, we'll get to those questions, but I wanted to turn it over to Terri really quickly, just so she could kind of add anything that she did not get a chance to do in the formal presentation, and then we'll jump back in with some of the questions from the chat, and if anyone has any questions from her. I knew we do have a couple of people with their hands raised, but we'll go ahead and let Terri go ahead and have a few words, and then we'll get to the people who've actually raised their hands, and then we'll jump into the chat.
Am I unmuted? I'm not seeing myself here.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Let's see, I'm trying to see the visual. Okay, well, I'm still in awe of the data that I'm looking at, and I'm so grateful for Mary's allowing us to test her. I can't emphasize enough, this is really just scratching the surface. As I mentioned, looking at, say, the case of Harding and how that's pointing in a whole other direction, I can tell you outright, even his piece is taking me to other people that are in another cluster. And I just feel like we have the potential now at this point to figure out all these layered twisting connections, and we can really reclaim our history. So, I kind of feel like I said, I'm at a loss of words, because here I have Mary, and I think of her as this little humble little lady, and all that she's accomplished and given us all these years, and it just makes me very optimistic in terms of the way forward. I know there's some specific questions that everybody will have about the different lines that they're seeing. And again, I just want to remind you that this has the potential to just really blow up. We just need bigger sampling so that we can see these fine details, because what I was trying to get across in terms of showing how that triangulation worked, you can see that it's specific to that part of the line. But then, you have this cluster with other people in it, and it goes off in another direction. But again, this shows it's doable. And, we can stop this idea that we can't formally document and reclaim our history. Now, I'm seeing some raised hands, and I've got to tell you guys, I'm a bit illiterate when it comes to the digital side. So you guys are going to have to help me out in terms of, how to respond to different people at this point.
Okay, I think the first person that we have who's raised their hands is Miss Adams. And if you could unmute yourself if you wanted to go ahead and address your question, and welcome.
Hi, Adolphus.
I'm so happy that you're here, because your results, I'm pretty certain, are the key to cluster number 5.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah.
Great. Welcome. No, I'm serious. I would put my money on it that you would unlock that cluster for us if you were a part of this, the work that we're doing here.
To tell you the truth, this is unbelievable within the past, I will say, couple of weeks, because I have been on Ancestry, of course, and this is how I connected to, actually, Adolphus found me first when my DNA became available. And, I was always had a curiosity about, my family in the South, which everybody in the family only told me bits and pieces.
Right.
So
That's our
eventually,
way.
yeah. And you know, I always heard we had family in Georgia. Always heard that. But I'm like, well, who is it? So, you know, the questions and everything linked back to my grandmother. So, of course, she died in 81 and everything else. But getting, you know, my DNA back and how fast I found somebody that quick, which was Adolphus, and I got in contact with him, you know, really quickly. And he said, as soon as I seen the Fowlers, and I was like, oh my God, that's it, you know, because I remember, you know, everything. But as I was doing my research, it's jaw-dropping, eye-opening, you know, situations with people, secrets that were never told, even to the oldest cousins of the family. So, you know, and it's like you have to sit there and really kind of tell the story in your head, you know, from day one.
Exactly. So, now, the reason I'm so interested, though, in viewing your results in a browser is because your family did migrate out of the county early enough that you would help us to isolate some of those crisscrossing pieces. And I'll be able to definitively say, just like in the case of Johnny, that seemed to be an isolated piece. That's the piece that Andriana, I'm sorry, is
right the first time. My name.
Oh, Andrina. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, I want to make certain I get it right. And by the way, I see somebody's asked about where you're located. If you're comfortable, feel free to, you know, share. But her family did move out of the state around the turn of the century, I believe. And again, it's really helped us to isolate. But again, we can't see it on Ancestry. We know you're a cousin. We know you're up in there someplace, but we can't see exactly where.
To MyHeritage. But for me being on it so long, I haven't talked to you in a minute. There's some other surprises that just popped up not too long ago. And I told Adolphus I found more relatives in Georgia. And I said, they're right there with you. So, you know, and
we're all over.
Yeah, literally for what once I started talking to them and how this came about, I'm looking on Ancestry and I'm looking at 4th, 3rd cousins because they're close. So I see this one person and my grandmother's sisters match exactly on his tree. So I said, okay, let me find out who this is. And I told him, but he directed me to the monarch of the family that's been doing family reunions for years. And once I talked to her, come to find out they are doing Zoom meetings with relatives and how everybody is connecting. And one cousin said, how's she related? Who's she connected to? You know, I just hear all these in the back. And once they start telling me names and I added them to the tree, you won't believe it. That's when
I will. And again, I just want to emphasize it's good that everybody's testing, but again, we cannot tell you exactly. And I'm going to tell you something about, especially with some of these close connections that you're seeing. I brought up the issue of endogamy because that kind of skews the numbers as well. And we can only really see those double cousin things, like I said, that gray cluster that basically helped me to finesse the connection when we can put them in other tools. So that's why, again, I got to emphasize that we need people on this platform so we can actually see the connection and figure out why this person might be holding an excessive amount of DNA, markers for the level that they should be coming in. And that's where, again, we need you there. But I do thank you for your comment and your questions. We're gonna definitely be talking, okay?
Yeah.
So I think Adolphus, is there another question as well?
Oh, they are lining up. The next person we have up is Winston Relaford. So Winston, if you want to go ahead and ask your question or your comment.
Hi, cuz. How are you?
You're very, very well, thank you.
Well, I gotta say that I am enamored over this report and what you've done. It has made me, I'm speechless. And
thank you.
I want to tell you,
you're a key part of it.
well, I am so happy to be that key part, and we'll continue to do so. And what you've done has motivated me to move forward and and do some more things with it, because the connection is now with the clarity at which you pointed it out, and then the proof that you have that the connection is real. We knew it, we talked about it, but to see it and know that everything is based in facts, that just makes my story much more compelling. When I talk to people, I get an opportunity to do that. So thank you so very much. And
You're welcome.
Adolphus, I'm just enamored and motivated now to move even further. So you've created many more questions than we have before. So you'll be hearing a lot more from me. Yes,
Yes, I'm
absolutely.
looking forward to that, because again, when I showed the clusters that I did, I have questions about the other people, and I can see a path forward already with those people addressing another part of our big network. Actually, that's going to crisscross as well. So
Yes.
we'll definitely be talking and working together to figure out those old Genlets and the Shahs as well, because I know that's your common connection to Mary. But again, I'm so grateful that you guys are here, and we're gonna work this thing out. Because I said, basically, if we continue on this trajectory, I really feel like if we get enough of a sampling, say in 5 years, anybody that's from that area should be able to find their families.
Awesome. Quick question for you.
Mhm.
What now I've tested, I have a niece that's tested, a nephew that's tested. Now, where should we go with the testing, and in terms of that? Who should I get to test? So that might help us.
Well, that's more of an Adolphus question, but I am going to say, as long as you test, I'm happy. But when you test, wherever you do it, upload it into MyHeritage so we can work with the Chromosome Browser and these types of tools, because that's the key. Again, I just need to see it, and I'm doing more and more. I've actually worked with my mother's side, which they're a very close knit family. They don't talk about anything. I've kind of learned part of it is because basically she had a grandmother that crossed the color line and didn't look back. So that whole story was very murky, and even the death certificates and stuff are wrong, but I followed the DNA and I figured it out. And so, and they're all grateful for it. But my point is, as little information as I had to work with, it just blew that right open, just because I could see it and put it into a chromosome browser and use these other tools to really drill down and figure it out. So again, my message is that this is possible. We don't have to have people say that, we can't find these people because they're enslaved. You can see the veil can be lifted.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Adolphus, you might want to take the second half of this. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Winston, for participating. We really appreciate it. In terms of identifying additional people to test, ideally what you want to try and do is identify the seniors in your family. And at this point, Winston, you and your brothers and sisters might be the seniors. Again, based on what Terri shared in the beginning, you get half your DNA from your mom, half your DNA from your dad. And so what I would do, I would try and identify, based on what lines you're trying to research, I would try and identify more of your siblings to test and potential first cousins to test. Because even if you two siblings won't inherit the same mix of DNA from their parents. So there'll be people that you may match on your maternal side that you and your mother may match with, that your sibling may not match with you, and then vice versa. So I highly encourage people to try and identify the oldest people in the family first, and then move down to that next generation and try and get as many people to test as possible. And to reiterate what Terri said, ultimately, it doesn't matter where you test with, but we're trying to have people to get on the MyHeritage platform because of the tools that are there and available, and just because of the fact that once you're on some of the other testing platforms, it's just a little bit easier to get them into MyHeritage, so you can kind of see it from both sides in terms of what the estimated relationship is, and you can literally see that little tool where it shows you that you actually triangulate. That's a very, very powerful tool. So I'm just trying to encourage people, if you have people, especially if you have seniors who have not tested, I've been encouraging people to get them tested onto MyHeritage. And the reason why is that MyHeritage is a cheek swab test, whereas 23andMe and Ancestry, that's a saliva test. And if you've tested with Ancestry, you realize it takes a while to fill that tube up to that little black line. And some of our seniors actually have a challenge, with that. So that's just one of the things I just wanted to highlight in terms of trying to get more people to test. And if you have matches on Ancestry that you're interested in, send them a kind email and see if they will then migrate over to MyHeritage. Again, the upload is a free process to upload. At some point, they have additional tools that you can unlock for a fee of like $29.99. But again, even that does go on sale at some point when they have an International DNA Day. I've seen that $29.99 drop down to almost 50% off. And again, compared to other costs, it's relatively cost efficient. So that's one thing that I would encourage to try and get more of our people into MyHeritage so we can really start to look at these chromosomes and start to parse things out. Thank you, Winston, for participating. And it looks like Mr. J. Vern Cromartie is the next person who had their hand raised.
All right, thank you. Terry, I want to thank you very much for shedding light on Mary Moran Dawley. You did a wonderful job. And I have two questions for you. My first question for you is as follows. I'd like to know, what African ethnic group can her maternal line be traced to? That's one question. And then the second question is, does MyHeritage share the DNA results with law enforcement? Because African ancestry does not do it.
Right. First of all, she is on that maternal line of the Shahs. That would definitely be the Mende tribe that I'd mentioned in there. She is actually singing a song that was discovered. Well, I shouldn't say discovered because it's been passed from mother to child for over a century. But she's been singing this song that a linguist coming through, actually Lorenzo Dow Turner. Hope I'm getting the full name right, but he was one of the first who started recording the Gullah along the Georgia coast, an African-American linguist. Then after, I believe in the 70s, somebody else picked up the work, a gentleman by the name of Opala. He took a team down there, and that's when a lot of things started happening. And they looked up and found Mary and recorded her. Apparently they found an African tribe down there that recognized the lyrics. And this is something too, I hope Wilson will jump in, and because this is the direct descendant. Wilson is the son of Mary. Her grandson is also on as well, so they could speak to this better. But that's how the family was connected. It went right back there. And the only thing I could say again, in terms of the tribes, and especially in Africa, because we've been subjected to so much violence and basically jihads and all the migratory patterns that basically, genetically, they're changing. So that's where I was kind of warning people not to get too tied to a specific ethnicity, because I know, for example, anybody from Sapelo that descends from Bilali Muhammad, you're Fulani. But the Fulani of today are not the Fulani that are there now, because they conquered most of West Africa and then they're spreading south. So, the Fulani of Bilali's time actually had a lot of Berber in them. So that's not so, because right now, I think the biggest population, and you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I believe one of the biggest populations are those in Nigeria. The hostile people were absorbed as well. So again, you just got to be careful with the ethnic composition reports, because the sampling for modern day men will probably be slightly different, and it doesn't take into consideration that these people were migrating and changing the genetic makeup. Now you had a second part. I'm sorry.
The second question about the law enforcement question. Does MyHeritage share the DNA results with law enforcement?
And again, that's an Adolphus question. I got the impression, and this is kind of my view of the companies per se. I know there was a lot of trepidation after it was reported that GEDmatch was sharing. I believe you can opt out basically in terms of what can be seen. And I still think it's a valuable tool. There is a video out there that I have not yet looked at that's supposed to explain all these intricacies, and I do intend to follow up with it. But from what I understand, and one of the big differences, because my original results were 23andMe, their end game is pharmaceuticals. Okay, I'm not happy about that. But what I have done is taken control of the settings and, answered all of the little questions about what they can legally share about me. And that's what I advise people to do, because we're at this point in life where we can't put the toothpaste back into the tube at this point. They can get to us. They got us. They've been doing and collecting all of this data for over 20 years now. So, and just the sheer amount of people that have taken DNA tests, they'll find your cousin if your cousin went out there and is up to no good. That's now just a fact of life. So I think the key now is to take control of our data. You answer those questions and you put the limitations on it. And, ultimately, if you have to pursue it legally, that's the only answer. But really, you can't hide in this day and age. But I understand in the last discussion that I had with some of the team there is that they are strictly a genealogy company. They're not into the pharmaceutical piece. They're not really into the law enforcement piece. They're just doing genealogy. So that's why I feel comfortable about making this a hub for all of us at this point. But again, we're in this environment where, corporate decisions are made. They're accountable to shareholders, and every day things change on us, and the rug is drawn out from under us. So that would probably be my best answer. And I am going to follow up and find the link to this video that is supposed to explain all the intricacies in terms of law enforcement and pharmaceuticals, so we can all make better decisions. But I would just advise everybody, regardless of any site. I mean, you can't go to, say, a party city without them asking for your email and your phone now. That's just the environment that we're in. And I just say, take control of your profile and the permissions that are granted. And I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think Stacy was able to drop in the chat a link from MyHeritage's statement regarding the law enforcement. Yeah, they do not readily share if their approach with a court order. Obviously, they will comply with that, but it's not a free for all in terms of law enforcement, having access to your DNA.
I just want to point out too that AfricanAncestry.com has the largest DNA bank pertaining to Black people in the world. They have the largest.
Yeah, I've read about. I haven't tested with them. Like I said, I tested with 23andMe initially.
Thank you.
But that particular
You're welcome. Nice to meet you.
Hi, that particular data space with African ancestry is not going to give you any culture, any relative connections at all. It will show, and their database is not as many. These things you all just talked about is very limited. It's very limited. I've done all of them and compared them and talked with Dr. Kittle about it, but it's not going to give you deep stuff. For real.
Some of us really want to know what African ethnic group can our line be traced back to. And that was a particular interest to me, because I really wanted to know that. And I found through them that on my father's side, I am a Bakan from Ghana, and on my mother's side, I am Yoruba from Nigeria. And that was very, very important to me to know.
Yeah, but that's the only thing it can give you.
That's what I want to know, though. But that was the main thing I want to know.
Right.
I used 23andMe, and I got the other data too. But I really want to know that. I want to know what particular group did I come from. I wanted to know that.
Yeah, but that's not
that's the point. Yeah, but that is the point that I was making, that you will test with companies that you want specific information from. Because, like, for example, you go to 23andMe, you get your haplogroup. And so that's that ancient DNA marker. But you go on Ancestry, it's like tons of people. But again, as far as I'm concerned, I can't get the type of information I need to figure out these little fine details and discern how we're connected. So like I said, I can tell you, yeah, we're cousins, and yeah, you might be a Moran, but that's as far as it's going to go at this point. And another thing, even with the removal, say, of the smaller segments, which I know everybody says it's just genetic dust, you can't say genetic dust when you've got, say, 50 people matching you, even though in some cases they may be Mormons, but just, even in saying that, it's that's nothing to, squawk at. And at our level, it does help us to reach back to the former planter class. And really, I kind of feel bad about, and another reason I'm so driven to do this is because this generation coming in behind us, it is washing out. They'll never be able to connect and figure out those things if, say, we were at this stage 10 years later. So yeah, it's the work we're doing is important, but you do pick a testing company based upon the information that you want. And then again, I tell everybody to read the privacy statements and the restrictions and what you can actually control in terms of permissions, and you go with what you're comfortable with. But I'm a big fan though of MyHeritage, especially because again, what I did with my mother's DNA results, which I never expected, I was sold in, because that was 30 years of a heavy curtain that I didn't think I could penetrate. Thank you for your question, Vern. It's nice meeting you.
Yeah, and I'll quickly jump in. One of the things that we are partnering with MyHeritage, about a year and a half ago, we actually presented them with a proposal to see if they would partner with us to help us get some of our seniors tested. And they did come to the table with a commitment to help us test 100 of our seniors. And so that's what's really driving us at this point in terms of working with that partnership with MyHeritage, because of the fact that they've effectively agreed to donate 100 kits to us so we can actually get, people, our seniors on the coast tested. So that's at this point, really why, we're supporting them, because of the fact that they are in fact supporting us in our efforts to get more of our seniors tested. It looks like the next person who raised their hand is none other than Wilson Damon Moran. So Mr. Moran, if you want to unmute yourself, welcome.
Welcome, cousin.
Terry, hey, Adolphus, how y'all doing? Great.
And we're doing great, thank you.
And that was an amazing presentation, as always.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
The quick question I had, though, is just because I know part of it, the screen was just a small part of it. Is it going to be replayed, or can we replay it, or is there a replay that we'll be able to access or anything like that if we wanted to see it again?
We'll be posting it. And again, I'm not the most tech savvy in the group. I'm the traditional paper and pencil girl. I'm only in it because Adolphus pushed me off that curb and made me and I am eternally grateful, for it. But we will be putting it up. And again, we've got the amazing talents of Stacy Cole and Michelle Johnson. They've been handling a lot of the technical pieces. And like I said, we're a great cohesive team, we're getting the work done.
Okay.
But you will have access. And I should say, probably this is part of a bigger presentation, and actually the intention was to show all 4 lines, but again, time was an issue, and I didn't want you guys to just drop off because it's too long. I do have the original one, which I'll be sharing directly with your family. It's just my way of saying thank you so much for allowing us to test Mary and work with her, collaborate and get this done. It's really going to help a lot of us figure out where we are and how we're connected in McIntosh County and really along the coast, because our people are spread all out. You got a really solid Bahamian connection out there that I'm just dying to connect with. So we'll find out.
Oh, that's okay. Great. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
Yeah, one of the questions that we had from the chat, I think a more recent question, literally had to do with looking at information for sidecars. And I think Michelle was able to drop, some of that information. Some of those earlier questions lauded the work of the late, great Cornelia Walker Bailey. And again, the folks on Sapelo sidecars have picked up the torch. Due to COVID, the annual Cultural Day has been on hiatus, but I'm proud to announce and happy to announce that the Cultural Day will be back on for this year. So kind of keep your eyes peeled. Look out for the sidecars website, join their Facebook group so you can know when those dates will be. And again, it's going to be in October. I think it's around the 3rd weekend in October. So if you want to go ahead and
I'm
pencil
there.
that in. It is a fantastic event, a great way to meet people with ties to that Georgia coast. And there's so many people that have ties to Sapelo that just are not aware of it. And I don't know if he's on today, but Kevin Hughes has been some fantastic work in terms of connecting people on Sapelo. And so it's just amazing how many people, as far as their family lore may go, their family lore may say they start up in Arkansas, but based on what we've seen with the DNA, they're definite ties to Sapelo Island. So I just highly encourage people, if you have the opportunity to participate this October, please, come on down, because I'm going to, pencil it in on my calendar. I'm definitely going to be there. So just look for the beat up Honda Civic in the parking lot, and I'll meet you at the ferry.
Yeah, and I'm very pleased that you mentioned Kevin Hughes, also Norman Randolph. The Low Country Georgia initiative started out of the collaboration of the four of us initially, talking and going back and forth and sharing. And I got to say, Norman and Kevin, I'm so grateful for their participation and inclusion in the project, because they're basically asking a ton of questions, and they generally push me. Again, I kind of get set in my ways because I'm that old school traditional genealogist, and between them and like, Adolphus again pushing me into genetic genealogy, I'm just grateful to work with the team. But they are, again, some of the initial founding members of the project. So thank you, Norman and Kevin, if you're out there.
Yeah, and if you guys are interested in, the coastal Georgia, genealogy, just go ahead and send us an email, or just drop, something in the chat, because Ujima Gen, that at .org, that's our website. And so you can reach out to us, there, as well. But one of the things, just to kind of give you guys a further foundation, is that with the Low Country DNA Project, as we were, meeting researchers over the years, and with the advent of DNA, we literally came to the conclusion that, McIntosh County, people on the coast, Terri noted in her presentation that, these are isolated communities. And so once you started to see the pedigree collapse, the endogamy, the people that stayed on the coast, especially to the point that I was coming up, you're going to be double, triple, sometimes even 4 times cousins to people that are in your community. And so once you have that type of DNA that's just sitting there in that community, if you can get that group of people that stayed to test, it'll literally give you a wonderful foundation to help people connect with other people that left a few generations ago. And with Miss Aunt Adams, on the line, her family left 100 years ago. And so once you start to look at the connections, you would have thought that her connections to people on the coast would have potentially washed out. But because of the fact that those of us who stayed on the coast, we married and then married and married again, she's matching higher than you would expect her, to the point of maybe 2 generations. Because at this point, the DNA that she should share with people on the Georgia, technically, based on just the raw numbers, should have washed out at this point. So the people on the coast literally represent a gold mine of DNA. So if you know of any seniors who have ties to that Georgia coast, let me know. In terms of us working with MyHeritage, we the proposal effectively was, the 3 groups that we're looking for were Harris Neck, Sapelo Island, and Butler Island. Those are the 3 groups in our proposal. So in terms of us utilizing those 100 kits, those are the populations that we're looking to test, individuals that are definitely descended from those areas. And so that's what we're looking for. But in terms of working with MyHeritage, the kits are relatively inexpensive. And for me, every time they go on sale, I'll grab an extra couple, and I'll see if I can follow up the person in the chat who had a 97-year-old who wants to potentially get that person tested. I mean, outside of the MyHeritage stock, I have my own personal stock. So I'll be more than happy to donate a kit to get your person tested, because a 97-year-old with the DNA, once you get tested on the autosomal DNA, that goes back 210 years. And so to get someone in their 90s to test will do so much for your family history research. I can't even put a value on that. So that person needs to be a priority in terms of getting them tested.
And I would like to add something that off of what Adolphus is saying in terms of the partnership. I think it's very important as a community, especially with the the times that we're living through now, where there's tends to be a bit of an assault, not a bit, there is a all-out assault on Black history and our ties within the country. I think it's very important that we support businesses that support Black culture and the advancement of learning more about our history and being able to share it. So that is part of the reason too that I'm so grateful that MyHeritage, and the one reason I put in each of my presentations, it's the website platform that cares about our community, because one, they're giving us the tools to figure this out, and two, they're supporting Adolphus's effort to test the senior people. So they're stepping up. I also want to mention our sponsor, Coastal Georgia Genealogical Society. Again, we found a partner in supporting this effort and providing this type of programming. They actually are doing a membership drive. It's only $10. Even if you don't join, donate, because again, it's very important that we support the people that support us, that are interested in fact and maintaining and preserving our historical legacy. Next question, Adolphus, is anybody else? Let's see.
Yeah, I think Leon had a question about doing the research to potentially support citizenship. So if you wanted to unmute yourself and to elaborate a little bit more, we'll see if we can potentially have a response.
All right, certainly. Thank you, Adolphus and Terry. We really appreciate the work that you guys are doing. It's very inspiring. 2019, 2020, we went to Sierra Leone, and we visited our village of Sinian Angola. And that was a very eye-opening experience. It gave me a new sense of identity, if you will, just knowing where you come from. Growing up in Georgia, speaking a different language than everybody else spoke, or hearing other people in your community speak even a more different language, we tried to sometimes hide and suppress our cultural language, how we grew up. We pronounce words the way they sound instead of the correct English way of doing it. And so just going back and realizing the Gullah-Geechee connection was really inspiring to me, but more so important with the identity part of it, knowing who you are, where you came from. And that was really the thing that got me and gave me a sense of really knowing who I am, where we came from, who my family is, and all of that. So I really appreciate you guys for doing the work, because today now that took my expectations to another notch, and knowing who we are, where we came from. So that's great stuff. And I really appreciate you guys for doing it.
Thank you.
So Terry, one correction I wanted to make with you.
Okay.
Winston is handsome in his own rights, okay? But that was my picture that you were using to call his name.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I will definitely take, well, you know what? When I saw the picture, I said, that's Winston, but yeah, and it's been a while. So forgive me, because I haven't seen Winston. When's the last time we've seen each other?
Yeah, but that's great. He's a good looking guy as well. So,
he is, and so are you. You got it good, it's in our genes. It runs in the family.
Hey, Terry, you just gave him a major compliment.
Yeah, so, but anyway,
I'm so happy that both of you made it on, and we will definitely be talking, because like I said, there's even more that I'm seeing that I just didn't have the time, to share here today.
And thank you for your passion for doing what you're doing. And it looks like you're very confident. You know what you're talking about. You're very convincing. And so
thank you.
That just boosts my expectations also to another level. So thanks very much, Terry and Adolphus.
Thank you. We're just exposing what we're seeing. Like I said, we can't make this up at this point. We're and that's basically is what differentiates this type of research from the traditional paper trails, because there are mistakes in the paper. Like I said, I've got a whole made up mythology behind one side of my mom's family, because they were covering up the crossing over, basically. So yeah, the DNA doesn't lie, and it will direct you. And I keep telling Adolphus, all we have to do is keep following this pattern, and we'll get there.
There you go.
Thank you, though, so much.
You're welcome. And just to follow up with the post that I made about we're trying to see how we can connect with Sierra Leone. so far as
Mhm.
DNA to become citizens. And so
Mhm. Oh, I see.
wondering how that could play into our efforts to gain citizenship.
Yeah, well, that segment on 20 is definitely the mandate. I'm pretty certain of that. I just need a wider cross section, but it stands out. And again, that triangulation tool is like, hey, look at me. It's, when I was looking at the information, and again, what I was amazed at, it is so precise, because here you're in this cluster with two other people that don't belong in that particular, on that segment, but they're still a part of that genetic cluster. And I've been able to take that in that direction. I pretty much have an idea of how they fit in. And I'm hoping that, if anybody knows Harding, have them contact me, because I really want to talk to him. But because he's going to open up another section for us that kind of crisscrosses over as well.
All right, thanks much. Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add to that is that people are doing more research. I'm pretty sure you may have been aware of the presentation that was done last year on Butler Island. And one of the things that, Brian Sheffy and the group that he's working with Martine and those guys, is that they're making attempts to identify the actual ships that came in, to see if we could, trace actual lots of people as they came into the ships. And, as a part of that project, that's really what got started, really, with trying to focus in on Sapelo, Butler Island, is because of the fact that, we unfortunately, we were property. And so they were keeping detailed records, of our movements. Is that if we could focus in on the DNA that's left, that's concentrated, and then start to make those ties to the actual planters and tie into the work that Brian is doing, if we can start to make those connections and then identify the specific ship port of entry, I think that'll potentially help us kind of literally, for those of us who are interested, trace back to those actual, African roots. So again, as Terry said, it's a marathon, not a sprint, but I'm hoping and praying as more of us, everyone has something, to bring to the table. It might be your, you talked to, Aunt Mary years ago, and she said that, cousin so-and-so was related on Big Mama's side. Well, that little tip in conjunction with the DNA will literally help us start to put a lot of these families back together. And I am starting to really encourage everyone, if you are having any type of family event and you have seniors, especially if it's a formal family reunion, put that in your family reunion budget to go ahead and get some of your oldest family members tested.
Yes.
Again, the prices go on sale. So for about $100, $150, you might be able to get, 3 or 4 kits that you can get your people tested. And the beautiful thing about DNA, as long as you get the test results, you can look at it this year, next year, 10 years from now. But, once the DNA is gone, that person's passed, it's almost, irretrievable. You can't get it back. And so that's why I'm really wanting people to try and get the seniors tested, while they're here. And especially if they are interested, they could probably help you figure out a lot of the stuff that you're looking at. And so that's one of the things that I'm just, really pushing people to go ahead and, jump into the DNA. But I just want to reiterate, DNA is not a substitute for pencil and paper. So Terri Ward's pencil and paper, that stuff is still absolutely critical, because in order to make sense of the DNA, you are going to have to have done your research, talk to your family, actually go in, look at the census records, and literally start to build, some of these trees. So I don't know if there's anything else, from the chat, but if anyone else wanted to make a quick comment, because I noticed that we're almost 2 hours, in at this point, I'll go ahead and yield the floor to any additional questions that may be out there.
If there aren't any additional questions, I did want to share my screen one last time. Everybody good?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Hold on a second. I wanted basically to thank everybody appropriately, because I ended and had to edit the presentation very quickly at the end, because like I said, it was massive, because the intention was to go over the 4 different branches of her family. So I didn't want to miss anybody, but special thank you, heartfelt, for cousin Mary testing for us, for her immediate family, Wilson, Damon, Jason, DJ. You guys know I love and adore you. And thank you for supporting us and allowing us to share her results and her story. I want to thank the Relaford line of extended kin, my Moran family reunion, family and friends, because I know that half of you made up the audience today, and I was really shocked. But it was nice to see you there. I'm going to thank my dad, who was my mentor and the original griot that really helped me, start this as young as the age of 6. When I started asking all these questions, he was just persistent about trying to share how we were all connected. My granduncle Arthur, who again just passed at the age of 103, and I miss his wisdom and his blunt and direct way of sharing the history. My Uncle Nate, whose laugh, I miss him. All my immediate family. My new friends, partners, and family at Ujima Genealogy of Coastal Georgia and the Coastal Georgia Genealogical Society. I can't thank you guys enough. Again, it's very important that we support these organizations. We at Ujima are fairly new, and we're still putting things into place to gather some traction and interest. But Coastal Georgia Genealogical Society is an established association that's doing great work and great programming, and we must support those that support us. So again, special thanks to Stacy Cole, Michelle Johnson, and of course my ride or die, my partner in crime, Adolphus Armstrong. We've been at it too long, but again, he pushes me out of my comfort zone, and we get this type of stuff done. And lastly, I want to thank every attendee who took the time to pre-register and show up for us. We really, really appreciate it. And the response and the feedback that we're getting has been phenomenal. I'm honored, and thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I guess we'll turn it over to Michelle for a formal send-off. Thank you all.
Thank you, Adolphus, and thank you, Terry, and thank you, Stacy, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. I think Terry's already wrapped up the thank yous for us. Again, I want to remind you to visit our website at ujimagen.org. Follow us on Facebook. We have a lot of exciting things planned. We're really good at coming up with ideas for programs. It just takes us a while to get them rolling, but we hope you'll follow us so that you can see what's coming up next. And we hope you have a good rest of the weekend, the little bit that's left of it. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.